Yer, what's good, YouTube? It's your boy Nehemiah, aka Neo, and today we're going to be talking about the Kevin Durant situation, but not in terms of the Brooklyn Nets, but more so in terms of how this can impact super straight trades from now on. Because obviously the Nets did not really want to trade him, and honestly, they didn't. We all know that he really didn't get traded at all, and because they didn't really trade him, they really just set a precedent in the league where all these superstars don't really need to be traded. Something like the James Harden situation, for example. If this were to happen after the Kevin Durant situation, there's a good chance that James Harden just doesn't get traded at all. And I want to talk about the future of that and whether or not this is going to be very impactful for the nearest future of the league. So let's get into it. So one thing I do want to talk about is Kevin Durant's trade value was very high in terms of how long his contract was and how good of a player he is. In my personal opinion, I haven't done my top 20 list yet, but he's definitely at least in my top seven players of the league. When we're talking about full health and excluding Kawhi because I just don't know how he looks for the next season. But we're talking about a top seven player. We have never seen a top seven player get traded recently. And there was only one really good request for a trade, and that was Kobe Bryant, if I'm not mistaken. So that's one of the things. Another thing is we can also just look at the template of the AD trade. However, the problem with the AD trade is that AD was on an expiring contract, and I don't think he was as good as Kevin Durant is now. So there's really a decent gap in terms of how good they were actually. And not only that, but Kevin Durant has 4 more years on his contract. He's essentially going to have to stay there if the team doesn't get a good offer for them. So now that we established that, it's really, really essential for us to talk about why the Brooklyn Nets just didn't want to trade him. And that's because, again, no real trade value from the rest of the teams. The Memphis Grizzlies didn't want to give up Jaren Jackson Jr. or Desmond Bain. The Toronto Raptors did not want to give up Scotty Barnes. And honestly, I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, you have to really evaluate your assets compared to Kevin Durant. When we look at Kevin Durant as a player, there are very few teams that could actually use him while trading up some of their biggest assets. I would think that the Boston Celtics would do that. Even though they would have to give up Jaylen Brown and maybe even Robert Williams, they would still benefit from making that trade, in comparison to a team like maybe even the Toronto Raptors, where a lot of their stuff with Scotty Barnes, Fred VanVleet, or Pascal Siakam, two of the three may get traded in this deal. And I understand why they would be very hesitant to make that type of trade because a lot of their roster is just getting downgraded just for a guy like Kevin Durant who does have a little injury history. But speaking of this, it's really weird how this whole situation panned out because the Brooklyn Nets were asking for such a high value that a lot of teams just can't accommodate that for. And the reason why I say it's weird is because it just hasn't been precedented before that a team like the Brooklyn Nets would not really trade their superstar. In fact, his request to trade got revoked. He sent it back so he could just play with Kyrie this one season. And I just want to see if this is going to be a new future for the league. If this is going to be the future of trades in this league. If they don't have the assets to really trade for a guy that they want, don't trade him. This isn't something that we've seen recently. A guy like even James Harden last year, they really just traded him as soon as possible because he was going to be a free agent the next season. But even before that, the James Harden to the Brooklyn Nets trade, I think that was a prime example of a team just kind of giving up on the type of assets that they could really get. He could have, the Houston Rockets could have gone Ben Simmons. They could have gotten a lot of maybe even better picks, but right now it's looking like the Brooklyn Nets picks are going to be amazing for the future. And honestly, I think that they could have even landed maybe even Maxi in the deal. So I think that if this trade just didn't go through like the Kevin Durant one did, I think that we could still see a bigger package for James Harden. However, I do want to at least be the devil's advocate for this because I think that the Kevin Durant trade would have been the best idea for the Brooklyn Nets to do at this current situation, because there are very, very many ways that this next season could pan out. It could either go really, really well or really, really bad. And honestly, I think you just have to roll your dice on this one. Personally, I think that it's going to be probably closer to the bottom, only because there's not one. They kind of turned around the roster a little bit during this offseason, and I don't think it's enough for them to like be one of the top contenders. Let's say Milwaukee or Boston, but they're still not the worst team ever. Not only that, but this next season is definitely going to be different because they're going to have Ben Simmons instead of just no one. So I think that's going to be great. But if we really look at it from a bird's eye view, at least, I don't think that there's really much success that the Brooklyn Nets could get, even if Ben Simmons is as good as we think he could be. Because if we're thinking about it like this, they got swept by the Boston Celtics without Robert Williams for a majority of the games. And even when he did play, he was on minutes restriction. And it just wasn't looking the best for that type of team. You could pin it on the coaching, you could pin it on the ownership, you could pin it on whatever, even Kevin Durant to a large extent because he was not really the best in that situation. But do you really think that this team is going to be as good as they can next year to at least make it a 7 game series even? I don't know that. And when we look at it from that lens, it's really hard for me to understand that the Brooklyn Nets just didn't give up for the best offer available and that they're just going to wait out. Because after this season, there's a good chance that his trade value does go down. And if it does go down for the next couple of years, then we may see a trade where the Brooklyn Nets don't get as good of an asset as they could have earlier. Something similar to the Paul George, well, not really the Paul George trade. At least the Paul George trade to the Thunder, they didn't really get any assets besides Victor Oladipo and Sabonis. And while you could say it did pan out for the Indiana Pacers, which honestly it really did, at least during the moment, it really wasn't as good of an offer as they could have gotten. And to say that they got lowballed would be an understatement. But it did work out for them, so I can't really say much about that. So it's looking like if Kevin Durant doesn't get traded, it's really just gonna pan out in one of the two ways I already mentioned. Whether A, they really do get a really good offer later on and they expect teams to stop lowballing, which could honestly have a positive effect in the league where all these superstars don't get traded, but when they do get traded, it's going to be for a nice package for the other team. So they won't suffer something like let's say, the 2019 Spurs type of deal where Kawhi did get traded, but when he did get traded, he didn't get traded for the nicest package. He got lowballed to hell. Honestly, we had DeMar DeRozan getting traded, and that was pretty much the biggest thing that they got. They didn't get any picks, they didn't get anything. It was literally just a swap for those two. And the second thing is, if Kevin Durant doesn't get traded, but the offers start to drop, that's definitely going to be a negative for the league because now it's going to set a precedent for players to be traded as fast as possible. And if that's the case, then that means that essentially the players would have a right to leave almost any organization that they really want to. Now, I do think that it's going to end up benefiting the Nets more than anything. And I think that's going to be better for the league as a whole. While I do want players to move as swiftly as fast as possible, honestly, it's still not the best for the league, at least from a viewer's perspective, to see a team just get decimated in 1 year. I think that the Brooklyn Nets were definitely a failed experiment with the James Harden situation. I think that they just really want to learn from that. Try to trade for the best player with the best package, and now that they already traded a lot for him, James Harden, for example, they're going to be very swifty in terms of how good this package could be. And with this and excuse me, with NBA trades going the way that they're going right now, I think that this could really be good for the league if Kevin Durant doesn't get traded. and until we actually see a really solid package from one of these teams, like the Portland Trailblazers or such. So yeah, that's it for me. It's been your boy Nehemiah, aka Neo. I hope you guys are having a great one.